Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our study of the book of Psalms. Today we are in Psalm 48. And as we enter Psalm 48, this is going to be another psalm of the sons of Korah. We don't necessarily have a timeline for the psalm, except for the fact that it's going to come after David takes the city of Jerusalem and makes the city his capital and moves it to be the central place of the worship of God because of some of the things that are stated. And the reason that we know it's after this is because it's going to focus on Mount Zion. We'll say a little bit more about Mount Zion in just a minute. But for now, let's focus in on what is said in Psalm 48. Beginning in verse 1, we read, "Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in his holy mountain. Beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. God is in her palaces. He is known as her refuge. For behold, the kings assembled. They passed by together. They saw it, and so they marveled. They were troubled. They hastened away. Fear took hold of them there, and pain as of a woman in birth pangs, as when you break the ships of Tarshish with an east wind. As we have heard, so we have seen in the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God. God will establish it forever. We have thought, O God, on your loving kindness in the midst of your temple. According to your name, O God, so is your praise to the ends of the earth. Your right hand is full of righteousness. Let Mount Zion rejoice. Let the daughters of Judah be glad because of your judgments. Walk about Zion. Go all around her. Count her towers. Mark well her bulwarks. Consider her palaces, that you may tell it to the generation following. For this is God, our God forever and ever. He will be our guide, even to death." As you examine Psalm 48, there's a connecting that is being made between Mount Zion and God and the relationship that Israel has with God. Now, in order to comprehend what it is that's being discussed, we have to put ourselves somewhat in the place of an Israelite of that day. It begins with the recognition of what Mount Zion is. Mount Zion is going to be the mountain on which Jerusalem is going to be built, or at least the central peak on which Jerusalem is going to be built. It is going to be the place where eventually the temple is going to be built by Solomon. It is going to be the key place of worship. And there are some that have surmised that this psalm was actually written after the days of Solomon because of many of these things. And yet it is going to become the capital city of the kingdom of Israel in the days of David. And with that, you have first in the opening of the psalm the description of the city, that in the city of our God, in his holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. So notice the interchangeable ideas between the mountain and the city, and they're combining them together as the place where God is, or the place where God's influence is. Now, they are not literally saying God is in the mountain, or that this is where God lives in a physical sense, for we recognize God is spirit. He is not physical. He does not have a physical location that is the place where he walks, as it were, but rather it is the place where he comes to his people. It is the place where he comes together and watches over his people. And so from that standpoint, you have this importance being listed with Mount Zion and with the place of the worship of God, the place of the kings that God puts in place, and the influence of God over the nation being centered in Mount Zion. The second thing that you notice as you drop down a little bit further is the relationship of God with Jerusalem and with Mount Zion and with Israel, and the impact that it has on the kings of the nations round about. Because verse 4 talks about the kings assembled, they passed by together, they saw it, and so they marveled, they were troubled, they hastened away, fear took over them. Nobody wants to deal with Jerusalem. Nobody wants to fight against God and the kings of Jerusalem because of their relationship with God. Now, you have various other areas that will be attacked and battles that will be fought and things that will constantly go on, but nobody looks forward to attacking Jerusalem. Nobody looks forward to trying to defeat Mount Zion. And so you have this situation where, and even historically, in the days of the kingdom of Israel, when people would come against it, it would be for long sieges and it would be very prolonged situations that would take place. And yes, there would be times where Jerusalem would fall, or where the situations would become very dire in Jerusalem. And yet, here, the sons of Korah are talking about the general purview of God's relationship with Israel and the way that God watched over the capital of Israel. And so you have this relationship that is being discussed. In verse 8, he says, as we have seen, as we have heard, so we have seen. In the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God, God will establish it forever. This is a statement of confidence in God's relationship with Israel. Now, as you're going to see as you go through the history of Israel, there are many, many occasions where Israel turned their back on God, and because of that, there were consequences for it. And yet at the same time, those that served God knew and understood. And in the times when God was being served the way that he should have, when the people had their hearts turned toward God, you had a very different relationship between God and the people of Israel. And so you have these statements of this relationship and the praise for this relationship being brought out. As a matter of fact, at the end of the psalm, the call goes out in verse 11 to let Mount Zion rejoice. Let the daughters of Judah be glad because of your judgments. And then he says in verse 14, for this is God, our God forever and ever. He will be our guide even to death. Rejoice in the relationship that you have with God. Rejoice in all that God has done for you and in the fact that you have a place where you can go and be in the presence of God through your worship by means of the sacrifices and by means of the things that are available in Jerusalem. Be thankful, rejoice, and remember. And so here in Psalm 48, you have this picture of the relationship of Israel with God and the way that God watched over and set his place, the place where people could come to him in Jerusalem, in Mount Zion. And this is going to be the picture in the Old Testament of the relationship between God and his people. Now, the picture changes. It's different in the New Testament. It is not the same as the Old Testament. But that's a discussion for another time and for another place. Next time we'll come back and we will begin looking at Psalm 49. I hope that you'll join us then. Thank you for watching today. And until we come back next time, have a great day.